Serious, people who have experienced school shootings, what was it like to come back to school after the shooting? I went to Columbine and was a sophomore during the shooting. We went to our rival school, Chatfield, to finish the year. We had classes, but a lot of them didn't really do anything. Math was the only class that really tried to get back to normal. We also had tons of assemblies when random celebrities would show up. The following year we returned to Columbine. I remember a lot of parents built a human wall around the school to keep reporters out. Things returned to normal fairly quickly the next year. It was always weird with the school being remodeled though. Area where library used to be was gone. Getting your stuff back was a huge problem though. They kept our cars and other belongings for several months. This created a lot of issues as most high school students don't have multiple cars to get to school. Also, a lot of us left our backpacks when we finally got out of the school. I always had my wallet in there, so I didn't have any credit cards, IDs, etc. Also, the sprinklers came on after, so when I did finally get my stuff back, it was moldy and mostly ruined. I don't mean for this to sound whiny that I lost some belongings while others were paralyzed or even dead. Just something I never would have thought about had it not happened. NIU shooting in 2008. Nothing was really different except that Cole Hall was closed off and there were a bunch of hired security guards patrolling campus along with the university and city police. I went to NIU starting the following year. Knew a guy that was in the classroom when it happened. I can't imagine. A Mexican girl got shot in the leg by a rival gang at lunchtime at my high school. We didn't even go home. Only on lockdown for about 45 minutes. They hosed off the concrete before second lunch started and we continued on about our day. I was a senior at Virginia Tech when the massacre happened. I was one building over during the shooting. Had no idea. Opposite side of the building. And only knew something was wrong when a cop with a rifle burst into our classroom and yelled at us all to get off campus. I was one of the few people in the class who had a car. So we shoved as many people into my Geo Prism as we could and I numbly drove people home. I was lucky in that no one I knew personally died. Though my best friend was frighteningly close, she would have been in one of the rooms the shooter targeted if not for the professor's child getting the flu. Campus was quiet after that. It was April and we still had just over a month of classes left. If I recall, we had the option to continue with classes, but were also allowed to take the grade we had as is if we didn't feel up to coming to campus. A lot of professors gave optional written finals you could submit through email. Most tried coming back to class for a week or so, but no one could take atmosphere for long. Being on campus was sad, tense, and just generally emotional. I didn't attend the university-wide graduation ceremony, but if my department's ceremony was any indication, it was probably a morose affair. Fellow Hokie, I was a freshman that day and being an out-of-state kid without a car, I didn't have anywhere to go but hang out in the dorms with one or two other people. It was pretty tough to stick out the rest of the semester. Very sad and eerily empty campus though, that's for sure. Purdue shooting, early 2014. I was actually passing by the area minutes before it happened en route to a meeting with a professor, and didn't know what was happening until I met up with a friend in the union when the campus was on lockdown. Class was cancelled the next day, and there was a vigil one of the following nights. I actually remember it quite well, since a large portion of the school showed up in unity despite the sub-zero, I think, temperatures that night. It was certainly strange, as I was a freshman at the time, but the community helped those affected and the room was closed off for quite some time. Campus unity was something to behold following the event. Live about 10 minutes from Sandy Hook. Our teacher had to tell us not to tell any of the younger kids what had happened or he could lose his job. We were silent and had the principal come in and comfort us before we all went home and saw the news. This wasn't an aggressive shooting. This was a suicide shooting. Basically, my junior year was pretty boring, but I enjoyed hanging out with my friends. One of them was a senior I really got along with well. We would always find ways to humor ourselves in class, or we'd ditch and go get burritos, stuff like that. It was nice because it was a pretty small school. My graduating class was 18 students, so the teachers and students all knew each other and we got along well. His grades were poor, and the school decided they'd had enough of it and were throwing him out a few months before graduation for some reason. They had the power to do this. I don't know the rules for educational institutions. He told me about it and seemed pretty chipper about it. It sucked, but he was one to just go with the flow. Later that morning, really, he texted me and asked if I could hang out, and he really needed to just sit down and chat. I told him I couldn't since I was trying to hammer out one of my bigger school projects so I wouldn't fail my science class. He said, "No worries man, good luck. I'll be watching over you," and that seemed a bit off, but I didn't think much of it. Dude shot himself in his car on campus later that morning. It was a hard lesson to learn. Anytime I see someone I know say something similar to "I really need to talk to someone" or whatever, I drop everything and get a hold of them. Sometimes it's just menial "I had a crap day at work today," and sometimes it's "I can't handle this breakup anymore." The day he killed himself, school was a mess. The administrators basically tried to keep it quiet until the end of the school day so they didn't disrupt classes. When the news broke and spread around campus, it was pretty dreadful. People were crying in the hallways. Teachers would just start crying in the middle of a lesson. Grief counselors were brought in. Students stopped coming to school for a couple of weeks. It was not a pleasant experience. I don't know. This post is kind of all over the place. It's been a few years since I've really sat down and reflected on that day. I'm very sorry about your friend, but it's very kind of you to take the time to listen to everyone's problems. You seem like a quality human. In elementary school, this guy in my local town was cracked out and decided to go kill his entire family. My hometown is a small island in Florida, and so the man first went to the local hospital and killed his ex-wife in the parking lot along with injuring her friend. He then drove over to the school for his daughter, who was a teacher, but they locked the front office doors before he could get in. We heard our front office lady over the intercom say the lockdown code and accidentally said "oh my god" and heard a huge crash. Our front office was entirely glass and the guy was pretty insane, so he shot himself in front of the office, which was directly next to my classroom. It was near the end of the year, and since school shootings were pretty rare when I was in 4th grade, 2006, the news, CNN, actually informed my parents before the school could get a hold of them. My teacher was very level-headed and didn't tell us what was going on, while the other half of the school knew. There was a lot of crying and confusion that day, and it was pretty scary. The next day was actually the 4th grade SeaWorld field trip, which they didn't suspend, but it was really early in the morning and there were a ton of news vans outside the school. I really just remember how in class it was so uncommon to hear about school violence that everyone thought something crashed in the office at first, until we heard all the sirens and such. My teacher also looked out the window exit door, and since it was right near my class, I just remember her covering it with paper and not allowing anyone to go near it. A few of the kids didn't go, and then I think school was cancelled for the 5th graders. It was eerie to come back to school after. It is a really weird thing to look back on. Columbine, 1999. Freshman. I went back into the school once after to collect my belongs. Noped out of state. Spent the summer with my grandparents in Florida before moving to Texas and then to Oklahoma, where I graduated. I had 3 more years of high school. Everywhere I went, people seemed to magically know about my past, and it became a badge like a scarlet letter. I was forever that girl from Columbine. I'm a bit late to the discussion, but maybe I can input. I went to Virginia Tech and was present for the 2007 massacre, where 32 of our students were murdered. One friend of mine was killed, and another seriously wounded and miraculously survived. It was easily the most trying time in my life, and even almost 10 years later I remember that day in vivid detail. Returning after the shooting was surreal. Immediately following, President Bush came and delivered a speech in our stadium. We had a flood of support from numerous outlets, and the media presence was insane. We were excused from classes for a period of time, and our final exams were made optional. Returning back to VT the following semester was strange. Everyone had clearly changed in some way or another. The new freshmen were in a weird place. They hadn't been present but had certainly been affected, and chose to keep their enrollment despite the tragedy. Some of them felt like outsiders, having not been there when it occurred. Those of us who were present had clearly been affected. Most people seemed like they had aged several years over a course of several months. We were certainly kinder to one another and the VT family mindset was very evident. There were several memorial events throughout 2007 and the following years that had massive turnouts. Personally, I spent the next few months truly afraid something would happen again. Every time I was in class and heard noises in the hallway, my heart rate would go up and I would breathe a little heavier. Eventually, I came to peace with it and I only rarely have those moments. I put aside a lot of personal anger and conflict that I had prior to the shooting. Many of us pledged to life for 32 inches. I did so by committing to my studies and pursuing a career helping others. I think for almost all of us, the 16th of April, 2007 was a day that defined our young adult lives. I still have emotions come up about it fairly regularly. Most of the time I just think about it and miss my friends that I grew so close to during those few months. Every once in a while it brings me to tears. Most recently, I was visiting the Crime Museum in Washington, D.C., and was absolutely stunned to see an exhibit on the shooting. It just caught me by surprise that it had been so long ago that it was now a part of history and in a museum. I had a hard time holding everything back in that crowd of people around me. I can't say this was your typical school shooting, but I was the only staff member to witness an attempted murder-suicide right across the street from the school. The kids had just finished leaving the playground, and because I was doing my job, I was terrified because the child who lived in the house didn't show up at school that morning. I actually didn't go into the house, but I almost did, because I didn't know where the child was. I ran to a neighbor to have them call 911 and waited with the wife who wasn't able to answer my questions about where her kid was. She was in shock. Her husband just tried to shoot her and she got away and we turned to look at him just as he put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. I had to go back into the school and let the principal and counselor know that student just lost her parent. Thankfully, the mom had some idea it wasn't a good situation, so the kid stayed at a relative's house the night before and that's why I didn't see him come walking over like normal. It was terrible, but truthfully there were many ways it could have gone worse. The mom, child and his friends could have died. The students could have seen this go down. Instead, it was just me. My condolences for your trauma. That is a pretty big freaking deal. It's not just me, it's you. Please don't minimize yourself. You are important, and that doesn't take away from your feeling of gratitude that the kids didn't see. When I was a freshman/sophomore in high school, there was a drive-by shooting at our school. Some gangsters from the nearby inner city school, our school's rival, shot at our school from the main road, didn't even enter the parking lot. No one was injured, and it barely disrupted our school day. The JROTC was drilling outside when it happened, so they were the most in danger. The only damage was a few bullet holes in the front of our school. It was only a school shooting in the most technical sense of the word, but I felt obligated to mention it. Not every school shooting is lethal or devastating. That's not technically a school shooting, it's literally a school shooting. School shooting in 1997. There was a palpable tension in the air. There was fresh paint and plaster where shots had hit. Everyone wanted to talk about it but didn't really know how. Nothing like this had really happened before. The school put a plaque memorializing the deceased at the base of the flagpole. I went back to pay my respects on the 10th anniversary and was more than a bit distraught that the plaque was gone, and no one seemed to even remember that it had happened. The town has completely whitewashed the event from its history. I went to Brandon HS. I spent lots of time at Pearl HS for band competitions and such between 2001 to 2004. Even when I was in high school, people mostly refused to talk about it. It's disappointing to hear that the plaque was taken down. This probably isn't what you intended. I'm assuming you're asking about mass shootings like you see on the news. But frick it, there were a lot of school shootings in my life. Let me explain. I grew up in Oakland and went to public schools. Shootings were a fact of life. We would usually spend the next week running around all giddy, checking out the bullet holes, guessing what kind of gun it was, and finding out which gang did it and who, if anyone, was going to get shot in revenge. It was like gossip time for us kids. I should note that the vast majority of these shootings was some teenager trying to prove to gang members how tough he was. They'd just spray an Uzi off in the air and almost never hit anyone because they weren't actually trying to be killers, just to look like killers. I can think of maybe 3 kids I went to school with who actually got shot. Only one died. That being said, there were many other shootings around the schools which were far more fatal, but also not technically school shootings. Some H got shot in the parking lot one night. Taco Bell across the street got held up and the robber shot the clerk. 2 kids walking home from school got shot for their Jordans. Again, this was all normal stuff to us. I didn't hang out with the gangsters, so I didn't ever really feel like I was in danger. Not even after one drive-by shot at someone who was standing behind me. Only one died. Dawson College shooting. The atmosphere was very different. It was all everyone talked about during breaks. You could sense the fear in everyone whenever you get in the classroom. I remember a few weeks later somebody was freaked out by some magic trick across from the atrium and everybody just bolted out of their seats. Everybody was on edge. Well, although 6 people were shot, nobody was killed, so it wasn't the tragedy that others have been. So, it didn't feel all that different. Plus the shooting happened on the last day of school, so we had a summer to let it sink in. Sitting in my old high school right now about to perform for an alumni choir event. So props for the timely question. Biggest thing is noticing all the upgraded security they've implemented since I graduated. Sadly, all this really means is more heavy and locked doors, but ultimately doesn't actually lock off any areas. I'm happy to see that my school is healing and is operating like I remember. It's been a couple years now and all the students who experienced it have graduated, so I imagine it's not too hard to forget or ignore. Every time I look at it or hear about it, our shooting is the first thing that comes to mind. So needless to say, standing in the halls again really brings it back up. However, I don't really feel sadness or anxiety, just melancholy for the time before someone chose to take lives in order to express their obvious need for help. I only just realized this question is probably geared toward the first days back, but typing on my phone is hard, so I'll only go into what I remember if there's significant interest. Thanks for giving me a chance to express my thoughts on something I didn't know I needed to talk about. 2 kids argued. The younger brother of one took a gun and shot the other kid. He used to sit next to me in school. Nothing happened the next day. It wasn't even talked about that much. Hope I'm not too late. 1996. When I was 7, a man came into our school and killed 16 children and their teacher. I remember that we were in the classroom down the hall to the hall where assemblies and pay used to happen. Our teacher was handing out our books when we heard the first round of gunshots. I remember not actually knowing what was going on, but our teacher told us to get to the back of the classroom and stay quiet. She moved the tables in front of the door and started barricading them. I remember the gunshots were in succession. Groups of 2. I remember it took so long for the shots to stop, and I was just frozen. I was aware something was happening, but was mostly scared of how panicked and scared our teacher was. The look of fear on her face still haunts me. We waited maybe 3-5 minutes and then shots came in through the door. I remember there was no screaming but just curled up children on the floor. Our teacher stayed on the door whilst the gunshots came through. They hit chairs in the library near us. It went quiet, then I just remember a single shot. We waited 10 minutes before my teacher went out. She told us to stay on the floor and hide till she came back. The police came and we taken out of the classroom through the windows. We couldn't go through the hallway because of the bodies in the gym. I just remember my mother running up to me in panic and hugging me. We had a lot of time off, and we all went to the funeral. My mother took me out of that school, and after I had to talk to psychologists, because my mother thought it was the best thing to do. I'm now 27 and I'm still haunted by what happened that day. As I grow much older, I feel much more responsible for what happened. Whilst children were getting shot, I was in a room hiding. I sometimes think of how those children would have grown up. Please don't feel responsible for what happened. It was out of your control. I was at Simon's Rock in 1992 when Wayne Lowe shot 6 people with an assault rifle, killing a teacher and a classmate of ours. I was 15. I testified at Wayne's trial. He's doing life with no possibility of parole. 24 years later, everyone who went through it is still fricked up about it in some way. I did a reading with my murdered classmate's father this year. We are both writers. It was my first time meeting him. We had breakfast together the next day, and afterwards, he said, "You're a good kid. You've got a good heart, and you're a good writer. I hope you make it." I'm 39. I went and sat in my van and cried. When I was a freshman in high school, one of my classmates accidentally shot himself in the head, killing himself. That morning my mom dropped me off at school. Immediately getting out of the car, I sensed that something just felt off. It's hard to describe, but it felt like the school was enveloped in a heavy fog of emotions and sadness. I'd barely gotten to my locker when some friends caught up to me and told me about what happened. It was a shock to say the least. I wasn't friends with him, but we were on friendly terms at least. It was strange to think that this kid who I'd just seen yesterday was dead now. Classes weren't officially cancelled, but no teachers bothered to take attendance. The counseling room was open all day for anyone who wanted to utilize it. Those who could leave did. My mom was going to be at work all day, so I didn't have a ride home and stuck around. Going into each class, the teacher would come in, say a few words about the boy if they knew him, and if not, generally speaking about tragedy and loss, and would retreat to their desk. We all just sat down kind of shell-shocked. Many girls cried openly. 7th period was the class I dreaded all day. It was the only class I had together with him. We sat in tables, and his seat was behind mine. We used to turn around and joke with each other from time to time, or give each other a hard time for infringing on the other's space. I sat down in my chair, feeling the emptiness behind me. I could feel everyone else staring hard at the chair, thinking about the person who'd never sit there again. The teacher echoed my sentiments. She'd been dreading this class all day. Only about half of the class were there. We all ended up sharing stories about him. He was a bit of a joker, so we talked about times when he made us laugh, or tried and failed miserably. A few people even managed smiles. It was strangely therapeutic. If memory serves me correctly, I believe that was a Friday. Coming back to school on Monday, things had returned to normal. Of course, the empty chair in 7th period still haunted us, but we had to put that behind us and just move on. When I was in 9th grade, still junior high out here, a kid in the grade below me shot up the cafeteria and took a few people hostage for a while. Luckily nobody was seriously injured. I was in class at the time and remember someone coming over the intercom and saying, "Seagull, seagull, seagull." The students all looked at each other like WTF. The teacher had a shocked look, ran to the door, looked out, ran to the window and did the same, then told us all we were evacuating the building. We thought it was a drill until we saw people running. This was pre-1999 when every school prepared for this scenario. When we were all standing around outside, the rumors started fast about what was happening. I freaked a bit when I couldn't find my little sister, but luckily I heard from someone else her class was outside too. They had the usual grief counselors when school resumed, but nothing was really different. The bullet holes were still in the walls for a long time. Nobody really talked about it at all. Teachers shut down conversations about it and told us we could talk to the counselors but not each other. It's left a lot of unanswered questions for me nearly 20 years later. The kid was my best friend in 2nd grade before I changed schools and skipped a grade. I just never understood how he got from normal kid to hostage taker. I think about it every time I pass his childhood home on the way to see my parents. I know I'm late to the party, but frick it, I made an account just for this, so here goes. I was a freshman during the UCSB Isla Vista shooting. It happened on a Friday evening, so most of my floor mates were out in the floor lounge watching TV. I was on my way down to a brother's pre-graduation party when I ran into a friend who said shots had been heard and the building was on lockdown. Overall, not many people knew it was very serious at the time. We had gotten plenty of alerts like this from campus security before because plenty of sketchy stuff goes down in IV. Once the lockdown happened, we knew it was the real deal. I didn't know the names of the dead until the next day. The school held a candlelight vigil where thousands and thousands of people participated. It was honestly the most beautiful and heartbreaking experience I've ever participated in. We walked from Stork Plaza on campus to a park in Isla Vista, where friends and family members had an opportunity to speak about their memories of our fallen students. I assumed that nobody I knew would be among the dead, but I was wrong. Two of my friends, Veronica and Katie, had been walking to get coffee and food when they were gunned down. I know the place where they died. I walk or skate by it every day on my way to campus. The experience changed me. I dropped out of school for almost 2 years and am just now coming back. I no longer have the same naivete about mortality or life that I once did. But that's not the worst part for me. The terrible part about a school shooting is that they are forgotten so quickly. I'm supposed to be a senior now. The only people who were in Isla Vista for the massacre are my class. A full 75% plus of students weren't there for it. And the names and faces of my friends who died, as well as the 4 other victims, are almost erased. I'm sorry for getting so emotional and for the terrible formatting. Posting from mobile. But I needed to get all that off of my chest. Thank you for letting me do so. Surreal. The incident came after a year with 2 suicides having already happened. Then a kid came into the English class I was the senior aide in and took us hostage until the teacher convinced him to let all of us but her and the girl he was obsessed with go. I ran to the office and called a code red, which we had just practiced for the first time 2 weeks previous, and the school went into lockdown. The kids and I had all scattered once we were let go. I wound up in a closet with the secretaries I'd known all my life, before moving into the cafeteria. Then all of us who had been in the room were moved into a lecture hall that also connected to the room my mom taught in, so I banged on the door and broke down. Found out the next day that the kid killed himself in front of the teacher and girl. Anyway, we only had 1 week of classes left when we came back. It happened on a Tuesday. We came back the following Monday. It was my senior year and I wound up not having to take finals or do anything but school pictures. One of the days, the kids, teacher and I gathered in my mom's room and just talked about anything that came to mind. The whole incident screwed with my head for a while, but now I think about it maybe once a year, if that. I was trapped at UCLA during the shooting 3 months ago. I rushed to campus for a final and arrived just after the lockdown was put into effect, and it was totally surreal since it was right during our final season. Some professors were understanding and cancelled exams for the rest of the week, as it was mandated that week, but others were being horribly insensitive dongs about it and forcing students to come in. Going back was surreal in that everyone pretty much had to deny the reality of what happened in order to survive finals and get things done. The campus was weirdly more somber and quiet. People were incredibly stressed by finals and also looking forward to graduating, but didn't know how to act in light of what had just happened. So everyone kept their heads down and just tried to get through it. There was a candlelight vigil the next week that about 5,000 people attended, as well as myself, to validate what had happened. It was beautiful and there was a circle of 100 people once it ended that stayed to speak their minds about the situation. My family was weirdly voyeuristic about the whole situation and kept asking inappropriate questions about the shooting when they came to my graduation. Personally, I felt numb and confused about the whole thing, and was pissed about how terrible and unprepared the campus was for this kind of emergency. I'd been there 5 years and not once did I have to do a fire or lockdown drill. I got involved with the Campus Safety Commission after in their efforts to audit and come up with better plans. I'm very sad for that poor professor and mostly angry about how poorly prepared we were, and upset at the horrible online trolls and drama llamas who started spreading false rumors and making light of the situation as it was happening, which caused it to expand from one shooter to an entire squadron and people's word-of-mouth reports. The Reddit thread for the incident was horrible, full of insensitive fearmongers who got off on taking up what was supposed to be an information chat with tasteless jokes. Anyway, it's weird, but basically everyone had to move on pretty quickly because of what happened, though after exams we all came back to reflect on what had happened and re-evaluate things. Anonymous post. Sorry, I attended Virginia Tech when the mass shooting occurred. I was off campus but had several classes in that building as well as worked with staff on the upper floor. 3 things stand out to me. 1. The media is disgusting. Hundreds of news stations came out and would hound you for comments. This included media outlets asking me questions in foreign languages that I obviously could not answer. They just wanted a soundbite, shoving video cameras in your face, literally less than a foot away, during the candlelight vigil, and trying to get as close as possible to where events occurred. Anything for ratings, I guess. It has impacted how I have viewed later tragedies on the news. 2. There were significant differences in how students and staff responded, seemingly independent of their proximity to events. The main ones seemed to be anger, feelings of helplessness, or extreme indifference. That is, they just saw it as a way out of class for a week. If a psychologist reads this, I would be interested to hear if these responses fit into any common response categories. 3. I think the greatest question on everybody's mind after the event was why, which really didn't fade until a week or two later when more details about the shooter were released. It wasn't until then people started to feel closure and things started to go back to normal. That's not to say the event didn't have long-lasting impacts on those there, but it at least helped those continue on with their lives. SPU 2014. Ended up not being able to go back. Too much trauma of having your friend die. I was barefoot as we were being escorted out by the police in case I had to run. Was wearing sandals. I stepped in someone's blood. Media got a hold of me and asked me questions trying to make me break. I learned to never talk to the media. They are cruel and only care about a story, not your humanity. Not a school shooting, but a very odd string of events at schools I went to for 4 years spanning 3rd, 6th grade. 3rd grade, my school was known for the Halloween carnival it threw every year. That year, a man showed up with a gun, was tackled and arrested before anything bad. 4th grade, school's population was bigger than the building, and we had lots of portable classrooms. The classroom I was in bordered a gate that bordered a side street. A garbage truck caught fire right outside of the gate, and therefore dumped its load onto the street. It spread the fire to the classroom I was in and then eventually most of the portables. LPT. Don't follow the fire protocol if it means staying in a burning building like my teacher tried. 5th grade, ready to start over. Nothing bad going to happen this year, whatever. One day, in our school's new and unburned portables, we heard some crazy butt scratching on the door. Nightmare crap. Teacher then gets a call that a mountain lion was stuck on campus. We had gates around the whole schoolyard, so the only way to get in was through the main building. I guess the thing was crazy flipping out trying to get out. Had to stay a couple hours past the end of school so that animal control could come. 6th grade, new school, new me, etc. Hopefully no more bad things happen. Except for, you know, some butthole kid throwing a can of Axe into a trash can and lighting it on fire, blowing up part of the school. Good times. Also, when I was like a freshman in high school, my sister drove her car into my middle school. Life is weird sometimes. In May of 1993, just 2 weeks before HS graduation, at Nimitz High School in Irving, TX, a 16-year-old boy went up to the back of a 13-year-old boy and shot him point blank in the back of the head, killing him in the hallway. The 13-year-old was on his way to the office to tell the principal that he thought the 16-year-old was going to bring a gun to school. I was working half days my senior year, so I was already gone and saw it on the news since those were the days of no cell phones or social media. I was terrified, not knowing immediately who it was because it could have been a friend for all I knew. Well, I was just glad I was about to graduate because after our class, it turned into gang school. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.